Welcome back to the classroom. My name is Mr. Wong, and today we're looking at acids and bases. The lesson intention for today is to describe the differences between an acid and a base. Your success criteria will be to explain the applications of common acids and bases. So, what are acids? Acids are corrosive. They eat away metals. When diluted, they can burn your skin if in high concentrations. Some features of acids is the sour taste. So we know that vinegar, citric fruits like lemons and oranges, those are acidic. They also have a sticky texture. So as you know, if you eat citrus fruits and if it goes over your hands tend to be more sticky overall. So that's some examples there. Some common acids are hydrochloric acid, so that's the acid found in your stomach. There is sulfuric acid, nitric acid, and acetic acid, which is what you find in vinegar. We have bases, which are also corrosive. When dissolved in water, they are also known as alkali. Soluble bases, so things that can dissolve in water, are called alkaline solutions. Bases tend to be slippery or soapy in touch. So based on that, most cleaning reagents are bases because they are slippery and soapy. If you ever taste a base, they're quite bitter as well. Not that I'm encouraging you to taste any cleaning reagents though. Some common bases include sodium hydroxide, sodium bicarbonate, that is baking soda, that is anti-acid, so that's used in case if you have a heartburn sensation. And we also have ammonia, which is a cleaning reagent. The last one we can talk about is a thing called a neutral substance. So a neutral substance is neither an acid nor base. It has a pH of 7. We'll talk about what pH means later on. But usually when something is neutral, in the universal indicator, it will be green. And we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail as well. It's usually harmless. Water is an example of a neutral substance. You have sodium chloride, so normal table salt, that's neutral. And we also have sugar, which in the form of glucose is also a neutral solution. This we'll talk about a little bit more in another lesson. Our focus today will be more about acids and bases. So, how do we actually measure how acidic or how basic something is? You use a thing called a pH chart. pH actually stands for potential hydrogen ions. So we're trying to measure how many hydrogen ions, and I'll show you the structure of a hydrogen ion, H+, which is also just measuring a proton. But if you can't remember that, you could just say you're trying to measure the hydrogen ion content. It scales between 0, as you see up here, to 14. 7 represents if it's neutral, so it's neither acidic or basic or alkaline. The closer you are to 0, the more acidic you are, and the further away from 0, or the closer you are to 14, the more alkali you are. You can see some examples of pHs. So water is 7, urine is actually acidic, sea salt is a little bit on the basic side, baking soda is basic, bleach is very basic, drain cleaner is also very basic, stomach acid is very acidic, and you can see with the other ones here as well. You can see black coffee, so that's just pure coffee beans grinded with water, is acidic. That kind of explains why there is sort of a sour texture to espresso coffees. Okay, so what difference is there between an acid and a base besides the texture and the taste? Acids are commonly defined as substance that releases a hydrogen ion when it dissolves in water. A base, on the other hand, will release hydroxide groups, maybe even oxide groups, when it's dissolved in water. The more accepted definition we have is it accepts a hydrogen ion, so it accepts a H+, or you could say it accepts a proton. So just remember, a hydrogen ion is the same thing as saying a proton, a positive charge. Here you can actually see a way we can measure different acids with the thing what we call indicators. Now in this little animation that I made, it's just a little experiment I did where I compared different levels of acidity between different types of bottled water. Okay, you can actually see with things like Mount Franklin and Pump, gives a really red texture in the colors, as you can see here. Tap water is green. Now, as we talked about with the pHs from before, okay, if something is neutral, it's a green color. The more acidic it is, it will go more lighter, so it goes green, then yellow, then red, and then the more basic colors are more the darker blues and purples. So what you can actually see here in bottled water from this color image, majority of bottled water is actually quite acidic. So if you remember what we said earlier, acids can corrode. So imagine you're drinking bottled water every day, you're actually exposing your teeth to more acidic solution that could potentially corrode a bit of enamel from your teeth. And as you can see, tap water is actually very neutral. It actually, out of all the different sources you can get, at least in Australia, tap water is actually one of the safest and most nutritious ways of getting water. Here is another image taken from the ABC's program War and Waste. You can actually see that the pH of tap water is 7, so that's neutral. Fiji water is 7.5. Pump, Mount Franklin, and Mount Franklin Sparkling, you can see their pHs are a lot lower. As a matter of fact, Mount Franklin Sparkling, the reason why its pH is even lower than the regular Mount Fountain is obviously if you have sparkling water, it means you have carbon dioxide dissolved into it. And we know that carbon dioxide, when it mixes with water, forms an acid called carbonic acid. So if you drink sparkling water, you're essentially drinking a soft drink that you know, but without flavor. You could even watch the program to know more, but we'll leave it at that. So, the question is, what is pH? We already said it measures the amount of hydrogen ions that are produced by an acid. So there's actually two types of acids you can get. You can get a strong acid and a weak acid. If you actually have a look at the scenario here, a strong acid actually releases all or close to all of its hydrogens. If it's a weak acid, you can see that we're still releasing hydrogens, but majority are stuck onto the original acid. So with a weak acid, it releases a very few. Amounts of hydrogen. Could we actually see indicators in real life? So what I'm trying to say is, could we tell if something is acidic or basic without using these fancy chemicals in the lab? And the actual answer is yes. So if we look at hydrangea flowers, they actually give different colored petals depending on the pH of the soil. So the level of acidity in the soil will actually affect the type of color you get. Changing the pH affects the availability of aluminium in the soil, which produces this bluish color. So the more acidic the soil is, the more blue the Hydrenia flowers will look, and the more base it becomes, or basic alkaline it becomes, the more pinkish color is produced. So these are ways of measuring level of acidities. The actual chemicals we use to measure it is known as indicators. It's a way of measuring the level of acidity or alkalinity or basicity of another substance. You can actually use red cabbage, it's a common demonstration, to look at the different types of acids and bases in your own house. All you need is red cabbage. You just need to boil it, strain it, and then extract the red cabbage juice, and you have your indicator to use. Okay, let's have a look at this little chart here. This is just a chart to show for different types of indicators that you may be able to find. We have things like methyl orange, litmus, bromo blue, and phenolphthalein. When you combine all these together, you get a indicator known as the universal indicator, and it can actually do multiple color changes from 0 to 14. These ones have a very specific range that it can work with. So you might want to use it every now and then, or you might want to use the universal one if you want to sort of demonstrate that change in acidity. Okay, so let's just go to the questions. Identify the indicator that will change color in a solution that changes from a pH of 8 to a pH of 9. In this case here, you can actually see phenolphthalein would be the ideal because it goes from colorless if it's a pH of 8 to a pH of 9 and it becomes pink. So we're going to say we're using phenolphthalein. And then question 2, it says predict the color of the solution when each of the following are added to ammonia. So if we have ammonia, which is a pH of 11, okay, what would we get? If it's bromo blue here, it would be blue. And then if it's phenolphthalein, we already said it is pink. Okay, so that's all you really need to know at this point when it comes to the indicators. Our next lesson, we're going to be looking at the reaction that occurs between acids and bases. Alright, so just to summarize everything we've discussed, different properties of acids and bases. Acids taste sour, they are sticky, they have a pH of lower than 7. They release hydrogen ions when in aqueous solution or when in dissolved in water. They corrode metals. This is another thing we haven't quite talked about, but if they react with metals, they form hydrogen gas. And if it's exposed to litmus, it gives this color. But that's not as important here. Bases, they taste bitter, they are slippery, they have a pH greater than 7, they release hydroxide ions, or you could say it receives hydrogen ions. That's another way of saying it. They do not corrode metals, and they do not react with metals to produce hydrogen gas. That's sort of the difference between the two there. If you found this video useful, please give a like to support future videos being published, and thank you for watching this video up to this point. Take care.